There are tons of big-time quarterbacks in college football in 2025, and when you take a look at the top 10 passers in the country, there are a couple of them from Group of 5 schools, and today I want to highlight a player who's truly having an insane season. A couple of years ago, he was a star at the FCS level, and now is having the most underrated season in college football in 2025. Today we're to talk about Joe Fagano, who somehow through this point in the season has still not thrown an interception, has helped UConn football have a great season, and might be playing his way onto NFL draft boards. We're to talk about how he got to this point, why he left Maine for UConn, and just how good he has been so far. But before we get started, if you're a big fan of college football, be sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a like if you support today's video, and let me know what player, team, topic, or situation I can cover next. Now let's go ahead and get started and talk about Joe Fagano. Okay, so in order to understand how he got to this point, we first need to go back in time. His rise with UConn is more than a comeback story, as it is a story of patience, precision, and perseverance. Fagano played his high school football in the state of Pennsylvania, and more specifically the town of Williamsport, which is home of the Little League World Series. He's been very mentally tough throughout his football career, and he said he got that from his dad, who was a former baseball player in the Philadelphia Phillies organization and was also a retired firefighter. Joe said, quote, "He always tells me he'd rather be in a cornfield in Nebraska running sprints with his team than doing anything else. I always tell myself that. This goes by fast, so I have to remember this is always what I love to do, and I'd rather be here with my teammates than doing pretty much anything." He was the youngest of 3 and always loved sports when he was growing up. Because of his dad playing baseball and living in the same area as the Little League World Series, he would initially see himself as a baseball player. He said, quote, "We'd have our own little sandlot thing going on. We played baseball out in the yard, and once we worked up a sweat and it got hot, we went to the pool." Fagano's older brothers Jake and Jared both played football in college, as Jake was a safety at Penn State, while Jared played at Akron for a year before also transferring to Penn State, where he played both football and baseball. It wasn't until he began to flourish as a quarterback in middle school that he realized he actually preferred that sport over baseball. He said, quote, "I played quarterback my whole life. I liked the team aspect of football, as everybody had to account for each other every play. To be brutally honest, I was better at football than I was at baseball." He eventually became an all-state selection and Offensive Player of the Year as he went to Williamsport High School. He competed in the East-West All-Star Game, and in total, he threw for over 4,000 yards and 42 touchdowns while playing in 6A competition. He also rushed for just under 1,000 yards and 16 touchdowns, and his numbers were super impressive. He said, quote, "I think I made the right choice." Fagano owes a lot to his dad and brothers for molding him into the player he is today, but he gives most of his credit to a freshman coach at Williamsport High. They spent a ton of time together working on his passing skills, his mechanics, and making him a better player. And Joe said, quote, "He was always there helping me get recruited with coaches. They've got to come see you throw, and that's the big thing, and he was always helping me with that and pitching me to other coaches." He received interest from a handful of schools, including UConn, Sacred Heart, and Bucknell, but he would end up going to Maine. They would come into play late in his senior year, as Nick Charlton was the Black Bears head coach, and he really wanted Joe to be his quarterback. He was coming off of a good season with Chris Ferguson as the starter for the Bears, and Joe said he was impressed with the culture of the team. He said, quote, "Up here, guys are a lot farther away from their homes. You kind of have to take care of each other, and I really like that aspect." Fagano would end up deciding to go to Maine, an FCS school, and he was rated as a 0-star recruit according to 24/7 Sports. Obviously, there's not going to be a ton of information about his time at Maine, but he would get a chance to have an early start there, as he took over on October 12th against Richmond after their starting quarterback had a season-ending foot injury. In total during his freshman year, he would pass for 1,652 yards with 16 touchdowns and 3 picks. He would then enter the infamous 2020 season, which everything was thrown on its head, but he still managed to pass for about 800 yards and 8 touchdowns with only 1 interception. One thing was popping off the page early on in his career, it was the fact that he did not turn the ball over. He'd then start the next 2 seasons at Maine, with his best season coming in 2022, as he threw for 2,200 yards with 15 touchdowns and 6 total interceptions. He helped Maine football win a good amount of games, and over 4 years with the Black Bears, he threw for 5,674 yards and 46 touchdowns, while only having 12 total interceptions. He was pretty solid. He decided to enter the 2023 transfer portal, where he found his new home at UConn. He would arrive at Connecticut with 2 years of eligibility remaining, and Nick Charlton, his former head coach, decided to come with him, as he was now the offensive coordinator under Joe Mora at UConn. He ended up being named the starter going into the 2023 campaign, but sadly, his season was cut short very early. After playing in just one game, Fagano would go down with a season-ending injury in 2023, and through his 2 games, he had passed for 173 yards without a touchdown and 1 interception. Taquan Roberson, the former Penn State transfer, would take over after that, and UConn didn't have the best season in the world. Going into 2024, he would compete with former blue-chip quarterback Nick Evers, who had spent time at both Oklahoma and Wisconsin, and after Evers got hurt, Joe would this time take over for the remainder of the year. He ended up throwing his first touchdown pass against Maryland before having 6 touchdowns against Merrimack. Pretty insane. He also had a performance of 3 touchdowns against Buffalo, 2 against UAB, 2 against Syracuse, 3 against UMass, and 2 in their bowl victory over North Carolina. In total last year, Joe had passed for 1,631 yards with 20 touchdowns and 4 interceptions. He had a pretty good season, and it looked like it was over for him. You could call it a good career for him, but after the Fenway Bowl, Skylar Bell, his number 1 receiver, was probably going to head off to Michigan, and Joe was going to be done. Except he wasn't done. Despite thinking there was no chance he was going to be able to come back, he would be able to. Skylar Bell said, quote, "It was funny. One of our staff members said we're waiting to see if Joe's coming back, and I kind of brushed over it, and then I called him. So I said, Joe, I thought you weren't coming back. So I immediately texted him, and he texted back, are you coming back? And eventually Skylar would decide to stay put, and he would get a chance. Because of the 2020 season and lost time due to injuries, he appealed the NCAA and got 1 final season of eligibility, which would be his 7th in Division I football. Head coach Jim Morris said, quote, "I don't have a clue how it happened, but I'm not going to question it. Somebody told me just before the bowl game that Joe has another year, and I didn't want to jinx it. With the whole 2020 situation, there's a lot of fluidity in eligibility requirements, and I doubt he'll get an 8th, but we'll take a 7th, that's for sure." Some thought he was maybe good enough to be a practice squad player in the NFL, but him coming back would not delay a chance at earning money. NIL was great, and now he would get a chance to have some experience, as he would play a lot of MAC schools, and then 3 games against Power 4 competition in Syracuse, Boston College, and Duke, who were all coming off decent years. Skylar Bell said, quote, "He's a seasoned quarterback with a lot of arm talent. He has the voice, and he has the command of the huddle." Ultimately, Joe has had a great year, as in Week 1 against Central Connecticut, he would pass for 260 yards and he had 4 total touchdowns. Then in Week 2, in a loss against Syracuse, he'd end up throwing for 259 yards but failed to have a touchdown. They somehow then lost to Delaware on the road, and now they were off to a 1-2 start. Things were starting to look bleak. Then in Week 4, he got them back in the win category as he helped them beat Ball State, and then also helped them beat Buffalo. They are now 3-2. He then got attention in the Florida International game, as in a 51-10 victory, he would go 22 of 28 for 4 touchdowns without an interception. Good news. Then against Boston College on the road, he went 23 of 31 for 362 yards and 4 touchdowns with no interceptions. He also had a rushing score. They unfortunately lost to Rice in double overtime, but he had nearly 400 yards and 3 touchdowns in that one. Then the last 2 weeks have been historic for him. Against UAB, he would throw for 267 yards and 4 touchdowns, and they would not only win, but he broke the 10,000-yard passing mark. There are not many quarterbacks that can say that, and more importantly for the program, Joe had them go into a bowl game for a 2nd straight season, which was huge for Coach Mora. Then, this past weekend against Duke, he'd have one of his best games yet, as he would throw for 311 yards and 3 touchdowns, and they would beat the Blue Devils 37-34, who were having a really good season. What's crazy to this point is that Joe has thrown for 2,840 yards with 25 touchdowns, and he still doesn't have an interception. I cannot remember the last time I saw a quarterback go an entire year without throwing a pick, but Joe has a chance to pull that off. That does not happen very often. He's the only player in the FBS to attempt more than 75 passes and not have a pick, while he ranks 2nd both nationally in passing yards and passing touchdowns. He's had a crazy season. He still has a couple more games to play, but at this rate, he's playing himself into at least getting drafted or an undrafted free agent deal. Head coach Jim Morris said, quote, "I would not write Joe off as a guy that'll finish his career at UConn. I think he's pretty special, and there's some real qualities, and he's going to be a mature player when he gets done here. I think he has a lot of value not just at this level, but at the next level, whether it's in the USFL, NFL, or Canada." No matter what, Joe is having a special season, and while he won't win the Heisman, he definitely deserves more attention, and it's crazy that he was a 0-star recruit, despite having 2 brothers who played at the Power 4 level. Who knows, I'm not a scout, but this guy could end up playing his way into the NFL, and that would be awesome. But what do you guys think? If you're a UConn fan, what do you think of Joe Fagano? How good do you think he is? And also, which player should I spotlight next? Be sure to let me know down below, leave a like if you want to support today's video, subscribe if you're new, and check out one of the videos on the end screen. Hope to see you guys again soon, but until next time, peace.